Everyone believed the billionaire's daughter had been born completely blind. For years, no one questioned it. Not the doctors, not the staff, not even her own father. She lived in silence, disconnected from the world, hidden away in a mansion full of secrets. But everything changed the day a new maid was hired. She wasn't a doctor or a specialist, just someone who paid attention. What she noticed during her quiet work around the house would unravel years of lies, challenge a powerful family's past, and bring to light a truth that had been buried since the day the little girl was born. The Wakefield mansion stood isolated on the edge of the city, a sprawling estate of marble and glass that caught the winter light like a crystal. To anyone passing the iron gates, it appeared magnificent. Inside, it felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and largely empty. Richard Wakefield was a man who had built empires. At 42, his reputation in the agricultural world was unshakable, but standing in the hallway of his own home, he looked hollow. His eyes carried the weight of 5 years of accumulated grief, the kind that never quite leaves, only shifts deeper into your bones. It started with a helicopter crash. His wife, Elena, had been inside it just days after Luna was born. Richard had never really recovered. He'd simply stopped. He retreated to this mansion with his newborn daughter and built walls around himself so high that even his business partners noticed the change. The diagnosis came early. Luna was completely blind. Congenital vision disorder, the doctors said. Inoperable, irreversible. Richard accepted it the way a man in free fall accepts gravity. For 5 years, this house became the world. Long hallways echoed with silence. Expensive therapists came and went. Specialists from around the world arrived with hope in their briefcases and left with it diminished. None of them could reach her. Luna remained somewhere unreachable, a small girl locked in her own quiet darkness. She rarely spoke. She didn't play. She didn't laugh. Most mornings, Richard would sit across from his daughter as she perched by the living room window, feeling the breeze, listening to distant sounds. Her eyes, so pale they were almost colorless, stared into nothing. She held a worn teddy bear, the only thing she seemed to genuinely care about. Richard would read to her, tell her stories, play music, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would tilt her head or her hand would drift slightly, as if she'd heard something that mattered. Those tiny gestures were everything to him. They were proof that she was still there, somewhere inside that quiet darkness. He whispered apologies to her regularly, words she couldn't hear in the way he meant them. "I'm sorry I couldn't save your mother. I'm sorry I couldn't fix this. I'm sorry." Julia Bennett was 27 years old, and she was running from something. She'd lost her newborn daughter just weeks after birth. The doctors couldn't explain what happened. There was no reason, no answer, just a small wooden box and a silence that followed her everywhere. She found the job listing in a newspaper. The Wakefield mansion, housekeeping. The pay was good. The location was isolated. It was perfect for someone who didn't want to think too much. The interview was brief. Richard opened the door himself, a tall man with grey threading through his beard, eyes that looked perpetually tired. He asked about her experience. She answered honestly but carefully. Then she mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she'd recently lost a child. She didn't elaborate. Richard didn't press. But something in that moment shifted between them. A recognition, perhaps, the kind that passes between people who've both been drowning. Julia's first days at the mansion blurred together. She moved from room to room, cleaning in silence, following a schedule that seemed designed to keep her invisible. It was during her 3rd day, on a break in the kitchen, that she first saw Luna. The girl sat near a window, small and still, holding her teddy bear. Her head tilted slightly. Her face was blank. Julia stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching. She'd never seen a child so completely absent. It wasn't just blindness, it was loneliness. Something in Julia recognized something in Luna. They didn't speak. Julia simply sat on the other side of the room and took her break, and in that silence, something passed between them too. Over the following days, Julia began to notice things, small, almost invisible things. Luna would pause, just slightly, when Julia entered a room. She would flinch when something fell. Her head would turn, ever so subtly, toward the direction of a sound. She was mapping her world entirely through her ears, her senses tuned to a precision that was almost heartbreaking. One afternoon, while folding linens in the hallway near Luna's room, Julia heard a sound. A soft hum. Not quite a melody, but human. It was Luna, sitting on the floor just inside her door, humming a tune that existed only in her own mind. Julia didn't interrupt. She sat nearby and kept working, letting the moment exist without disturbing it. A few minutes later, Luna stopped humming. Slowly, carefully, she crawled toward the hallway, her small hands searching for the wall. Julia stood up quietly and extended her hand without saying anything. Luna's hand stopped, hovering in the air. Then, very slowly, she reached out and touched Julia's fingers. It was the gentlest contact, barely a brush of skin, but it felt like everything. Julia didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just held the space where their hands had touched, and something shifted in the mansion that day. 3 weeks into working at the mansion, Julia was dusting Luna's room when she heard something. A whisper, almost inaudible. She turned. Luna sat in her corner, moving her lips slowly, murmuring words that weren't quite clear. Julia leaned in just enough to listen, and for the first time, she understood. Luna wasn't just making sounds. She was speaking. "What are you saying?" Julia whispered. Luna's voice came again, barely audible. And then, Julia realized something that made her freeze. The girl's head was moving, not randomly, with precision. Every time there was a sound, the creak of the floor, the shift of a curtain, the distant hum of something mechanical, Luna's head turned toward it, accurately, as if she was mapping the entire room through her ears alone. Julia decided to test something. She placed a toy on the floor and nudged it gently. Luna's body shifted toward exactly where the sound came from. Julia opened a drawer, then closed it. Luna's head tracked the motion. Julia stepped lightly, then tapped her shoe. Each time, Luna reacted. Small movements, precise, undeniable. Julia's heart began to race. She picked up her phone to check the time and accidentally turned on the flashlight. The beam of light crossed in front of Luna's face for just a fraction of a second. Luna's eyelids twitched. Her pupils shifted. Julia's breath caught in her throat. She turned the flashlight off. Then slowly, carefully, she turned it back on and waved her phone gently side to side in front of Luna's face. The girl didn't move her head, but her eyes flickered. They shifted slightly, as if trying to follow something. Julia moved closer and repeated the motion. Again, those tiny eye movements. Not strong, not focused, but there. Julia sat down slowly, her mind spinning. Could Luna actually see something, even just light? She pulled out her phone and documented everything, times, reactions, details. Her hands were trembling. For days, Julia conducted quiet experiments. She tested different times of day, different light sources, different rooms, and almost every time Luna showed some kind of reaction, subtle but real. She also found something else, a wooden box hidden behind towels in the bathroom cabinet. Inside were bottles of eye drops, prescription bottles with dates going back years. The labels were faded, but the name was clear, prescribed by Dr. Atticus Morrow. Julia searched the name on her phone when no one was around. The compound was used in treatments for eye pressure, but had been reported in rare cases to affect pupil response and light sensitivity if used long-term, especially in children. Something was very, very wrong. One evening, after Luna had settled into a calm state, Julia sat across from her. She pulled out the flashlight and looked at her gently. "Luna," she said softly, "I'm going to shine a little light. Tell me if you feel anything, okay?" Luna didn't answer, but she stayed still. Julia raised the flashlight slowly, pointing it toward Luna's eyes. Her own heart was pounding, fear and hope colliding inside her chest. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Luna blinked, slow, confused, then faster, as if reacting to brightness. "Luna, can you feel that?" Julia whispered. The room was absolutely silent, except for their breathing. Luna tilted her head slightly. Her eyebrows tightened. And then, in the smallest, most fragile voice, a voice that had barely been used in years, she said something that broke Julia open. "I think I saw a light, Mommy." Julia froze completely, not just because Luna could see, but because Luna had called her Mommy. Julia's eyes filled with tears immediately. She leaned forward and gently placed her hand on Luna's shoulder. "I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "You're safe." Luna didn't pull away. Instead, she slowly leaned forward until her head rested against Julia's chest. They stayed like that for several minutes. Julia held Luna without saying anything else. This wasn't a test that had worked. This was the beginning of something entirely new, something real. The next morning, Julia was back in Luna's room, kneeling beside her with the flashlight, needing to be certain. She was moving the light slowly across Luna's face when a voice exploded from the doorway. "What are you doing?" It was Richard. His face was flushed with anger and confusion. "What is that in your hand?" he demanded. Julia froze, trying to explain, but Richard grabbed the flashlight from her and stared at her with disbelief written across every feature. "Are you experimenting with my daughter?" he asked harshly. Before Julia could respond, something extraordinary happened. Luna stood up. For the first time in her life, she ran. Not shuffled, not stumbled. She ran straight toward Julia and wrapped her arms around her waist, holding on tightly. Her small body trembled. Richard was completely stunned. He had never seen his daughter move like that, never seen her walk with purpose, let alone run. "Luna," he said, his voice uncertain. The girl stayed quiet for a moment, still holding Julia. Then, with that same small, shaking voice, she said the words that would change everything. "I saw a light." Richard blinked. "What did you say?" Luna turned her head slightly toward his voice. "I saw a light." Richard looked at both of them, completely overwhelmed. For years he had believed his daughter was blind without question. But now she was talking, reacting, reaching for someone. He couldn't ignore what was happening. Slowly, without saying much else, he nodded. His voice came out low. "Stop giving her the eye drops. At least for now." Everything changed after that moment. Within days of stopping the medication, Luna's responses became stronger. She turned toward sunlight. She reacted to flashcards with shapes. She pointed at things. She smiled. She laughed. Richard stood in doorways watching, his expression shifting from disbelief to wonder to something deeper, guilt perhaps, or grief for all the years that had been lost. Julia spent hours with Luna, working patiently through simple games and visual tasks. Each day brought something new: colors, shapes, recognition. By the end of the first week, Luna was asking questions. "What color is that?" she'd ask, pointing. "Blue," Julia would answer, and Luna would say it back, carefully, "Blue." Richard began to believe again. It was written across his face every morning. But Julia couldn't stop there. She had to know why. Why had Luna been given these drops? Why had the diagnosis been so definitive when it clearly wasn't accurate? She contacted an old friend from nursing school, Sophia, now in her ophthalmology residency. They met at a diner, and Julia handed over one of the bottles. 3 days later, Sophia called. Her voice was tense. "You need to come," she said. Julia drove to the hospital, her stomach tight. Sophia brought her to a quiet office and closed the door. "These aren't normal eye drops," Sophia said, holding up the bottle. She pointed to a lab report. "The compound is cyclopentylate, but in extremely high doses. This chemical causes pupil contraction and inhibits light response. Prolonged use, especially in children, could easily cause what would appear to be complete blindness. This formula is intentional. Someone designed it to restrict vision." Julia felt the room tilt. "The drops made her blind?" she asked. "Yes, and the prescription—" Sophia pointed to a name in bold, Dr. Atticus Morrow. Julia's eyes widened. The same doctor who had treated Luna since birth. That evening, Julia sat with Richard in his office. She placed the lab report in front of him and waited while he read it. His expression changed slowly from confusion to disbelief to something much darker. When he saw Dr. Morrow's name, he stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "This can't be real," he said finally. "He treated Luna since she was a newborn. He told me she had no retinal response. He convinced me she would never see anything." Julia explained everything Sophia had told her. The chemical, the purpose, the risks. Richard nodded slowly. "Then we have to find him. We have to know why." What they uncovered was larger than either of them had imagined. Dr. Morrow hadn't practiced medicine in years. His license had been suspended after a series of lawsuits involving other children, cases that never made national news but were serious enough to force him out of the profession. In each case, families reported strange prescriptions, inconsistent diagnoses, and long-term damage. Richard felt sick. He realized he had never truly questioned the treatment Luna was receiving. After his wife died, he'd simply accepted what the doctor said, trusting without thinking deeper. Julia continued her research and found families willing to speak, people who had experienced similar situations with their own children. With all the evidence collected, Richard and Julia decided it was time to take formal action. They contacted the district attorney's office. When Dr. Morrow's name came up, the prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first to bring him up," he said. Over the following weeks, the investigation deepened. What emerged was shocking. Dr. Morrow had signed contracts with pharmaceutical companies. He'd used his position to conduct unofficial trials on children, prescribing unapproved eye treatments in exchange for financial compensation. The contracts were encrypted, but investigators matched product codes from the pharmaceutical companies to the ingredients in Luna's drops. It was all there: dates, names, transactions, signatures. Despite the chaos surrounding the investigation, something remarkable was happening inside the mansion. Luna had been taken for a full vision reassessment by a trusted specialist. The results confirmed what Julia and Richard already suspected. Luna had partial functional vision. Her sight would never be perfect, but she could detect light, identify shapes, and react to movement. Julia set up daily activities, colorful toys, movement-based games, time in sunlit rooms. Luna responded with pure curiosity, no fear, just wonder. She started drawing. Her first lines were shaky, uneven, but they were hers. "Is it good?" she asked, holding up the paper. Julia hugged her. "It's beautiful." Richard knelt beside her and said, "It's beautiful." Luna smiled and drew another one. It became a daily routine. Drawing, exploring colors, understanding the world in new ways. The mansion transformed. What had been silent and heavy now felt light, alive. Luna laughed. She asked questions. She reached for things. By the time the case went to official trial, public support was strong. Dozens of families testified. The pharmaceutical companies eventually admitted involvement. Dr. Morrow, found under a false identity in another state, was arrested and tried. When the guilty verdict was announced, it felt like justice had finally arrived. Luna didn't appear in court, but her drawings were submitted as evidence, proof of progress, proof of what had been stolen, proof of what could be recovered. That night, Luna showed Julia a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," she said. Julia smiled. The hard road had been traveled, and they'd made it together. Years passed. Luna was enrolled in a regular elementary school with a custom learning plan. Her first days were nerve-wracking, but within weeks she was answering questions, raising her hand, joining activities. She was fascinated by everything: colors, pictures, the way chalk marked a blackboard. She made friends. She excelled in art. Her teacher said she had a unique way of understanding shapes and color. Richard took a step back from his business. Julia remained fully present. Together, they created a home where Luna could heal and grow. By the time Luna turned 18, she had been accepted to an art academy. She moved into a small apartment in the city, but Richard and Julia remained close. She began working on a series of paintings inspired by her childhood. When she held her first public art exhibition, the gallery was packed. Luna stood before a microphone and looked out at the crowd. She paused, then spoke. "People often ask me when I saw light for the first time," she said, her voice calm and steady. "They expect me to talk about flashlights or sunlight or my first drawing. But the truth is, the first light I ever saw didn't come from my eyes. It came from her heart." She pointed to Julia, who stood beside Richard near the front row. The room went silent. Then slowly, the crowd began to clap. Some were already crying. Julia covered her mouth, moved to tears beyond measure. "That light," Luna continued, "taught me that seeing isn't just about eyes. It's about being seen. It's about someone believing in you when you can't believe in yourself. It's about love.